Members of the Progressive Caucus, I greet you. South Africa carries a revolutionary, historic and future obligation to guarantee peace and stability in the whole of the African continent. This must be done in conjunction with all other patriotic Africans in the entire continent. Like all African countries, the Democratic Republic of Congo is our strategic ally and must remain as such. There is nothing wrong with South Africa's participation in peacekeeping missions, including in the DRC. But such should be done with maximum support and military capacity, which this government is not providing to the South African National Defence Force. Our soldiers were surrendered to rebels by this government, which has neglected all aspects and facets of the army. We are fully aware that there are many role players in the DRC, including foreign governments and businesses that thrive through the destabilization of the DRC. We as uMkhonto WeSizwe believe that South Africa and all other progressive forces in the African continent must not retreat and neither surrender to the rebels and the external forces that are at the center of the ongoing conflict in the eastern part of the DRC, particularly Goma. Honorable members, the DRC is kept in perpetual conflict because there are forces that seek to loot natural endowments and mineral wealth. The African continent must never surrender to the DRC to external forces and rebels sponsored by foreign governments and private role players. When President Zuma was president of our country, there was never an attempt to attack our forces because they had maximum support. We are fully aware that the military intervention where our soldiers lost their lives was part of the Samir DRC. South Africa's participation in any peacekeeping mission should however be strategically placed, well-funded and supported, whether as part of SADC or United Nations. We know from the reports of our soldiers on the ground that the South African National Defence Force, particularly its Air Force capacity is being systematically decapitated and weakened. Without a well-capacitated Air Force, we will not win the battle against rebels and will not be able to silence the guns in the continent. South Africa is supposed to have the strongest and the most organized Air Force in the entire African continent, which under the current political leadership would be used to back up our peacekeeping missions whenever they are deployed on the ground. The grounding of the South African Air Force, symbolized by the humiliation absence of a flying past at the recent presidential inauguration, is a glaring testament to how far the defunding of the South African National Defence Force has gone. Honorable members, the inability to fill aircraft for ceremonial duties is a symptom of a broader crisis. A military that can no longer fulfill its mandate to defend national interests and support peacekeeping operations effectively. Our forces are left vulnerable due to inadequate funding, outdated equipment, and poor logistical support. The lives of our soldiers are put at risk in hostile environments with insufficient protection, and now we are seeing the tragic consequences. The government must be held accountable for sending our troops into danger without necessary means to ensure their safety. Under President Zuma, South Africa played a key role in bringing peace and stability in the DRC, supporting military and diplomatic efforts to curb violence and foster democratic transitions. President Zuma's administration provided substantial support to peacekeeping missions and actively engaged in conflict resolution efforts. President Zuma played a leading role in supporting the peace, stability, political and economic progress of the DRC because he understood our progress and success as a people cannot be separated from the development of the entire African continent. Additionally, to military and peacekeeping deployments, President Zuma played a leading role in safeguarding the political stability of the DRC in order to realize socio-economic progress and prosperity. We as uMkhonto WeSizwe stand here today to make the following demands, directives on what is to be done. One, South Africa and all other African countries and continental organizations must continue to play a meaningful diplomatic, economic, political and military roles in the DRC with the aim of safeguarding maximum stability and economic progress. Two, South Africa must fully support SADC and the Eastern African Community Joint Summit resolutions to declare ceasefire in Goma, that the Chiefs of Defense submit resolutions to declare a ceasefire or forces ceasefire to support the Chief of Defense Forces summit resolution to declare that we develop a security plan for the region within 5 days. That South Africa must fully support the idea brought by President Zuma in 2014 of establishing an African standby force, which will combat all forms of rebel movements, terrorist activities in the African continent. It is only a unified African standby force with maximum ground, air force, and naval capacity that can sustainably defend our continent from sponsored destabilizations, which is done for the theft of our natural endowments. That we demand the restoration of the South African Air Force, the army with full operational capacity, and that its top priority, that should be its top priority. Also, that to also develop and implement a sustainable peacekeeping strategy. And number 5, the government must invest in local defense manufacturing to ensure that our armed forces have the necessary equipment and resources, reducing reliance on foreign suppliers and strengthening national security. And lastly, Chair, Madam Speaker, the South African government must broaden and strengthen our economic cooperation and integration with the DRC. The immediate task in strengthening the economic cooperation should include strategies to complete the Inga hydroelectric project, which will be a turning point to the economic life of the DRC and the entire subcontinent. Failure to provide systematic support to the DRC will be surrendering the country and its natural resources to the rebels who are sponsored by external forces. The African continent must refuse to surrender national endowments and mineral wealth to the West, which continues to pillage our natural resources. Let us reinforce our capacity. Let us reinforce our capacity and work with collective to continue safeguarding the DRC. We should never surrender or never retreat and should never appear like we are running away from the rebel.
Honorable Speaker, Winston Churchill